Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Global Human Trafficking event that the San Francisco Cooperative Against Human Trafficking presents every year. We have great speakers today, and we look forward to your questions at the questions and answers session at the end. The San Francisco Cooperative Against Human Trafficking is a cross-sector coalition with membership of over 70 nonprofit organizations, law enforcement agencies, and government departments, and many educators, also medical professionals, students, and survivors. All of us work together to eradicate human trafficking here in the Bay Area and beyond. And we're very grateful for your contribution to this difficult fight. And we'll discuss today how other countries fight human trafficking, support the survivors, and work on prevention. And with this, I want to introduce our first, let me pin everybody. I want to introduce our first moderator for today, Timothy Soper. He is Assistant Special Agent in Charge in Homeland Security Investigation. And here is he appearing on the screen. Please mute yourself.
Timer on. Michael,
It's
second
very
echoing.
important. Thank you. And Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonia. Hey, good morning, everyone. As Antonia said, I'm Tim Soper with Homeland Security Investigations here in San Francisco. One of the areas in our portfolio is investigating crimes of human exploitation. That includes child exploitation. It also includes human trafficking. Both locally and nationally, our policy is to use a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach, and that's how we approach things internationally as well. This audience, I know many of you are very familiar with the international component of human trafficking. I think we can kind of just get right into it. Today, we're joined by two of my colleagues in HSI who are stationed abroad, one in Vancouver, Canada, and the other in Mexico City, Mexico. We're going to discuss the current state of human trafficking in those countries and the steps those countries are taking to combat it. Our first presenter is going to be HSI Representative Tammy Ketchum, assigned to Vancouver, Canada. Special Agent Ketchum has experience in juvenile justice and has investigated sex and labor trafficking. I know that simple introduction doesn't do you justice, so if you want to go into your background a little bit more, please do so. Tammy, the floor is yours.
Hi. So actually, I've been with Homeland Security Investigations for almost 15 years now. I spent approximately 10 years down in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and the last 4.5 or more here in Vancouver. While working in Harrisonburg, I worked in a small office. We covered 52 counties, so we worked a lot of different cases. And some of the cases that I did work were human trafficking, which included sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Since being here in Vancouver, we work very closely with Canadian law enforcement on any type of crime that has a nexus to Canada and the United States. Canada law enforcement assists our HSI offices in the US, and we assist their offices here in Canada. We have worked on a few human trafficking cases. I would say that they are all sex-related trafficking cases. Basically, the way that Canada is set up, you may already know, but there's 10 provinces and 3 territories. And across those 10 provinces, we have offices in British Columbia, Alberta, Montreal, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is just actually a one-person office. So we are able to cover all of Canada through our offices. The type of human trafficking that I have been involved with for cases here in Vancouver are sex trafficking cases. I'd say that the human trafficking that we're seeing here in Canada is quite similar to what we see in the United States. You're seeing the same types of things where it can occur in person, it can occur online, it can occur through connections, through family members, through loved ones. And it's the promise of a better life, relationships, or employment. 93% of trafficking victims that are reported to Canada law enforcement are victims that have been victimized within Canada. So what we're not seeing, even though they say Canada is a source country, a transit country, and a destination country for human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, we're seeing it across the provinces. We're not seeing them typically leave to go to the United States or another country to traffic victims. With that said, Canada has some statistics. Between 2014 and 2024, there were about 5,000 human trafficking cases that were reported to law enforcement. Now, we don't have any updated statistics since 2024, but the human trafficking hotline that is operated in Canada has reported that within 2024, they had over 5,000 calls for human trafficking related incidents. So we are seeing a rise. And we're also seeing a rise in calls to the human trafficking hotline in Canada for labor trafficking. They say that the human trafficking occurs mainly in the Ontario province, as well as Nova Scotia. Ontario is pretty big. We're looking at Toronto, Ottawa, major corridors, lots of urban cities, and that's the explanation as to why they think the human trafficking is increased in those areas. Canada's approach to human trafficking is pretty similar to the United States. They operate a human trafficking hotline just like we do in the United States. And specifically in British Columbia, there's a victim hotline where victims of any crime can call, but services are provided to those victims to include human trafficking victims. One of the things that we have seen as far as residential services for survivors of human trafficking is in Alberta, there's a residential facility that provides a 3-phase program. And a lot of survivors are referred to this program. So they'll leave Ontario.
Oh. This was unexpected.
Looks like
Canada
Tammy's dropped. Oh,
about
here we go.
human trafficking. I'm sorry?
Sorry, Tammy, you dropped off for a second. I think the last
Oh,
thing. Oh, you know what? It happens. I freeze just as much as anybody else. Not on purpose, of course. Could you go back to when you were talking about the 3-phase approach? You were talking about how people are moved out of their situation that they're in to Alberta for a 3-phase process. Could you start from that point, please?
Sure. I'm sorry. So there's a program called Reset Society of Calgary, and they have a program called Exit, Patient Intervention and Transition Program. And a lot of survivors who are trying to leave human trafficking situations will be referred to this residential program in Alberta. And it's one of the best programs that I've heard about in Canada that's assisting survivors. Also, just like in the United States, Canadian law enforcement really relies on non-government organizations to provide support for survivors as well as support for law enforcement in investigations. The specific thing that's changed most recently in British Columbia is they have created, Royal Canadian Mounted Police has created a 12-person team called the Counter Human Trafficking Unit in Major Crimes. And this is one of the first teams that has been focused just on human trafficking here in British Columbia. Their purpose is for intelligence gathering, officer training, and supporting criminal prosecutions that are related to British Columbia. That team has been instrumental. We've worked very closely with them, and that's who we've worked our human trafficking investigations with. We're not seeing a lot of new trends. We are seeing where traffickers are using messaging apps, smartphones. Cash is still king here in Canada, but a lot of cryptocurrency is starting to be used, and a lot of survivors that are being trafficked are being forced to actually put their money into like cryptocurrency, the crypto ATMs, and so that's where we're starting to see some changes. There's not really any new laws. I think that Canada has been working on just more awareness about human trafficking and also trying to inform the courts so that they'll address it in sentencing about, the detrimental effects of human trafficking. As far as HSI, what we've done here in Vancouver is we've partnered with that team that I just told you about in major crimes. And we've worked with them on investigations that have tied back to the United States as well as in Canada. We also work here at the U.S. Consulate with the American Citizenship Services. Sometimes they get calls from individuals who state that they're American citizens and they've been a victim of human trafficking. We actually had one who was a dual citizen of Canada and America, and we were able to work with them and Canadian law enforcement to assist that survivor. Um, and we work very closely. We have ports of entry. So we have U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They're located at our airport in Vancouver. They're also located at the land borders. So we work very closely with them. If at any time they get anybody that's displaying any type of red flag indicators for human trafficking, they'll call us right away. We've come out to the airport and we've done interviews in conjunction with CBP with those survivors and have talked to them and have tried to initiate investigations. Now, as far as one of the big things that we're dealing with now is the World Cup, FIFA. I know everybody knows about it and is waiting for it to arrive. We've been working very close with the Major Crimes Group with Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and we're developing a policy as to where anytime that there's a United States survivor or United States suspect that's encountered during those times, they're going to actually contact us. We're going to respond immediately, and we're going to work jointly with them in an effort to the U.S. Adopting that investigation. We're also working closely with Customs and Border Protection as a way that we can transport any survivors quickly through the ports of entry back into the United States to get them the services that they need. And the other thing that we're also doing is we're partnering with CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency, which is similar to our Customs and Border Protection. And we're going to provide outreach to them for their first line officers as far as what are some human trafficking indicators, what are things to look out for, what are some things that you can do at the port of entry to not only identify but address any type of human trafficking that you're seeing. I believe that's about my 10 minutes that has come up. So I'm glad to answer any questions when it's time for questions. And hopefully that gives you a pretty good overview about what's happening in Canada.
Yeah, we're going to hold questions for a little bit here, but you guys are free to put them in the chat too, so you don't forget. I'm personally very forgetful, so I like to write things down as they pop into my mind. Thank you, Tammy, so much for those. That was very helpful. Now we're going to move on to Mexico. So this is Special Agent Tom Quezon, the Assistant Attaché assigned to Mexico City. He oversees the human trafficking portfolio. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Tom because there's so much going on in Mexico, and he's still able to join us today. And not least of which was a human trafficking training that they kicked off for their host country officials this morning, and he still was able to carve out a little time for us. Really appreciate it. Tom, could you please go ahead?
Hello, all. Thank you guys for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I'm glad we're able to make this work. As you said, we do have a lot going on in Mexico right now, and then not the least of which is this fantastic trafficking conference that we're hosting right now. As you mentioned, yes, I'm one of the assistant attaches here in Mexico City. I oversee all the investigative efforts over transnational criminal organizations, and then to include the human trafficking as well as illicit finance portfolio within here in Mexico. And I think the illicit finance portfolio is important because we're always going to try to go after the money for the people profiting from these crimes. As Tim mentioned, we are currently hosting the Zero Tolerance Human Trafficking Conference here in Mexico City with our colleagues from INL. This international Congress is convening more than 350 U.S. and Mexican entities representing a wide spectrum of government, non-government, and private sector interests. This event and invitees represent a all hands on deck approach to anti-human trafficking and child exploitation efforts in preparation for the 2026 World Cup. This is the first event of this magnitude in Mexico and is focused on the collaboration between the various entities in furtherance of shared security priorities. And this conference is focusing on efforts both against human trafficking and the child exploitation. These crimes are related but distinct, and both demand sustained and focused attention. Child exploitation, in particular, is rising in both our countries. Human trafficking and child exploitation are victim-centric crimes and fundamentally different from other forms of criminal activity. In every case, there are two essential goals: catching and convicting the predator and caring for the victim. That second goal is just as important as the first. Human trafficking is not only about physical confinement or violence, it's about coercion, fear, control, and the loss of freedom. Ending modern slavery means restoring dignity, safety, and the possibility of a future for those who have been exploited. This is not only a law enforcement issue. It is not only a public awareness challenge, a private sector concern, or a government responsibility, or an NGO mission. It is a society-wide problem that requires all sectors working together. That's why this matters. U.S.-Mexico cooperation has reached a historic level. Disrupt illicit finance and hold traffickers accountable. But our cooperation is not measured only by arrests, extraditions, or transfers. It is measured by lives protected, by victims rescued, and by safer communities for all children to thrive in. This shared commitment is a priority for President Trump and President Sheinbaum, and is reflected every day in the work of our security institutions, prosecutors, investigators, service providers, and civil society partners.
While we're waiting here for a second, why don't we just take this moment while he tries to reconnect? Maybe Tammy, are you still able to be online right now? Maybe I
Yes,
could
I'm
just
here.
Okay. Maybe just take this time to maybe at follow up on a couple of points I heard from your talk earlier, and I really appreciate it. And Tom, if you jump back on, please just pipe up because it's hard to see all participants at the same time. Um, you mentioned the exit program, which sounds like a great model. Is that an NGO organization, or is that a government funded program, or is it a government run program? I guess is my question.
Right. It is an NGO that operates in Alberta. And there's actually, to my knowledge, not very many residential programs that are available. And this program actually services girls 16 and higher and into women. And then also they will accept women with their children, which is unusual. So it's a three-phase program that is well known. And that's why a lot of survivors from all different provinces will actually relocate there just to attend that program.
One issue that commonly comes up in the United States is that sex trafficking is more easily identifiable, right? Because law enforcement can like encounter them on the street, and they're not exclusively, but they tend to be female. Has Canada, have they started to build infrastructure for male victims as well?
Yeah, so the male victims are definitely underreported here in Canada. And then the male victims that are reported to be victims of human trafficking are usually older males. So it's a little different than what we're seeing in the United States. Uh, just my educated guess, I just think it's just being underreported and underidentified.
Similar with underreporting in the United States, I feel like we all agree that there's an underreporting on the labor trafficking side. I think we have some guesses as to the sectors where it occurs, but it's a less obvious crime than sex trafficking, where they are out trying to solicit a customer potentially, or online trying to solicit a customer. Do you have a sense of what labor trafficking in Canada would look like?
So labor trafficking in Canada will look very similar to the United States. You're seeing the same thing where people are being trafficked through construction, retail, agriculture, manufacturing. There was a case in 2019. I don't have a lot of details about it, but it was about people that came from Mexico, migrants to come over to work in Canada that were trafficked. I'll be honest with you, I've heard about very few cases. I did go to one human trafficking like program where they had some different outreach, and there was one investigator that had worked a large human labor trafficking case. But I really haven't heard about a lot. But what I have heard is that it would be similar and would mirror a lot of what we're seeing in the United States.
Pivoting a little bit to the use of cryptocurrency in Canada, cryptocurrency is perhaps a little less anonymous than some folks who use it think it is. Have we been able to make any inroads working with any of the cryptocurrency companies using the chain analytics to trace where that money is going?
Yes, there has been an investigator that actually we spoke to pretty recently. He had said he had a lot of success with cryptocurrency and getting information from like the Bitcoin ATMs where they were requiring the women that were being trafficked to actually go and deposit their money. We do have where the cryptocurrency companies are cooperative and providing information a lot of times under with legal demand. But I believe that the cases are definitely moving in that direction, and investigators are getting up to speed with cryptocurrency, darknet, and trying to investigate cases that way. I will say in Canada that it's been echoed that cash is still king. Cash apps sometimes are used, but still cash is king. And believe it or not, in Canada, one of the biggest ways to advertise sex work is actually in classifieds on Leo lists, kind of similar to what we had in the US, like Craigslist. That's actually the big way for that to occur.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here real quick on World Cup. So we just had the Super Bowl here, which is nothing compared to the size of the World Cup. As you guys who are avid football fans maybe realize, the World Cup has expanded. It's almost doubled in size actually with the number of games. It's went from 60-something games to 104 games. It's across 3 countries, and 11 cities in the United States will be affected. So I talked with the Center for Combating Human Trafficking, which coordinates a lot of these efforts. And I can say for the United States, to provide a little bit of a comparative insight, is we focus on 3 pillars. And they're the same for the Super Bowl. We're going to roll something up pretty similar for FIFA. San Francisco happens to also be hosting 6 World Cup games. And those 3 pillars are training, outreach, and operations. Training and outreach, those are the ones that take a lot of coordination and a lot of time. So we started working on those. I mean, you basically start a year ahead of time, right? Luckily with us with Super Bowl, we've done a lot of that already. But training and outreach are absolutely key, as well as doing tabletop exercises with the service providers to make sure that there are no kinks when it comes to encountering a survivor, to make sure that they get the services they need. You know, we know some of the kinds of services that they typically need, but then you might get surprised, right? You might get surprised by a new request, so you have to understand and be adaptable to react to that. Here domestically in the United States, we have the Blue Campaign. That's our national counter human trafficking campaign. And so they're involved in all these events. So they'll also be doing awareness in the different cities leading up to it, and also posting training as well. Here in San Francisco, we focus on training the fire departments because we had a lot of coverage from the U.S. Attorney's Office on training, from SFCAT on training, and from other partners. We already had a lot of the LEOs covered for training, as well as our local, in the United States, we call it NICRIC, but it's this local intelligence fusion center. So with all those folks already covered, we pivoted to trying to integrate into the fire department's training, human trafficking training as part of their curriculum. And by integrating the curriculum, we estimate we trained over 1,000 firefighters. So we're very proud of that, and we want to continue that here in the United States for just as a comparative to what Mexico and Canada might be seeing. We know these big events are, you know, I think that's the sense is, and I think you all will agree with me, that human trafficking happens every day. And sometimes the big events can perhaps make the general public who's not a practitioner think that, you know, it only is a magnet event. But the reality is that what we know here in San Francisco from hosting a lot of events is that these events, while they're not the only instances of human trafficking occurring, which is daily, unfortunately, they are good megaphones for highlighting the issue, for doing awareness, for getting training across, for bringing people together, and for having well-resourced survivor recovery operations and other operations targeting human traffickers. So at Super Bowl here, I'm off the top of my head, I want to say that we did 40-something survivor recoveries and about 15 trafficker arrests over the course of the 10 days leading up to the Super Bowl. When you magnify that across 104 games across 3 countries, there is a real possibility here of making I don't know if I want to call it substantial because the problem is so massive, but doing some real change and some real good for the folks we are able to recover and impact. I see Tom's back again, so I will be quiet and let him go back to covering on the World Cup. I think you may have been wrapping it up, but anything else you want to cover on the World Cup for Mexico's approach?
I was coming close to wrapping it up. The couple of last things, little comments I wanted to make regarding our efforts towards the World Cup is that I have a clear ask for everyone in participating today is that the cooperation starts and must continue. We need to break barriers, meet somebody outside your state, your country, or your sector, and then leave this forum with new ideas and new allies. And within the next 90 days, please try to take one concrete step to strengthen prevention, detection, or victim support. And then together we can all build a network strong enough to deny traffickers any opportunity. But we can only do that if we all work together.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate your perseverance too. I do have a question for you, if I could put you on the spot a little bit. So just to refresh everyone's memory, the Mexican presidential terms are 6 years, right? So that's on the longer side compared to international standards, right? Right now, we're 1 year into President Sheinbaum's presidency, and I was just kind of curious, is it a continuation of the human trafficking posture from the previous Mexican president, or has she taken any kind of different approach to human trafficking, combating it within her country?
We've noticed our cooperation here in Mexico is unprecedented with the new President Sheinbaum administration as well as the new Trump administration. We've been working hand in hand with our Mexican partners, not just against human trafficking, but against all forms of organized crime. There's a focused effort from both sides to really combat this problem jointly. It's a joint problem that we both encounter in the U.S. as well in Mexico, and it benefits both our countries. And so since the new administrations have taken over, we've noticed an enhanced amount of cooperation on all fronts, to include human smuggling and trafficking.
So in the last World Cup, there was a lot of open source media coverage on possible labor trafficking regarding the construction of the arenas. Now, I understand that's a little different this time because a lot of existing infrastructure is going to be used. That's certainly the case here in the United States. But I was sort of wondering I guess more on the Mexican side, I'm curious, is there any thought of that occurring regarding any kind of infrastructure improvements that are going to occur during the World Cup? Or are we mostly focused on sex trafficking occurring during the event itself?
We're more focused on the sex trafficking part of the event. There's a substantial labor force here in Mexico that they're able to tap into, and they're also, right, just like in the United States, where they're improving existing infrastructure. We've noticed it throughout Mexico City and within the other cities that are also hosting the games. Labor trafficking is not something we've seen, just due to the substantial size of the Mexican labor force. And what we are focusing most of our efforts on is the prostitution and sex trafficking aspect that are associated with these major sporting events.
Thank you. And my experience with human trafficking here in the United States, has indicated that yes, there are domestic traffickers who will take advantage of the World Cup to maybe specifically be active during those times. Not that they're not normally active, because they are, but sometimes you have people traveling from a little further afield, right? Specifically for those magnet events. Yeah. Is it your sense that you're anticipating that for the World Cup as well, that perhaps people from outlying provinces or outlying Mexican states may travel to the host cities throughout Mexico to increase human trafficking in that area during the time of the event?
We think that's a real possibility, and not just from within Mexico, but from all over the world, quite honestly. And so it's something we're working on enhancing our collaboration with Mexican officials to exchange information. So if they have any suspected malified actors, we can work with them jointly to try to do that. But we also need support from the private sector as well. I'm sorry, from the private sector as well, for them to be able to share what they're witnessing. So, like the Blue Campaign in the United States, where see something, say something. It's something we're heavily pushing here, and we're working in concert with Mexican authorities as well as the private sector on all fronts to try to enhance this cooperation, so we can all share real-time information to enable the safest World Cup ever.
Here in San Francisco, we have a Bay Area host committee, and they have been supportive. They provided some funding around the NFL Super Bowl event to support local NGOs. Is the government of Mexico, are they doing anything specific to bulk up their NGOs or service providers, or just their general response to the World Cup? I know you spoke to it a little bit, but is there any concrete action that the government of Mexico has taken so far or plans to take? I mean, it's just around the corner at this point. We're only 3 months away.
That's correct. And so they're taking like, from my perspective, a very all hands on deck approach. And so they're putting all their resources towards making this the safest possible. They're trying to make the country safer as a whole by working against some of these massive criminal networks and cartels and recently designated as FTOs. The cooperation against that to help just combat the trafficking is has been fantastic. Uh, they're making a very conscious effort to bolster all resources within city, state, and federal government to enable all this to happen and safely.
So one question about human trafficking in Mexico in general. Unlike the United States, unlike Canada, which as Tammy mentioned, it sounds like trafficking in Canada is domestic, primarily domestic, right? 93%, I think she said. In the United States, we have both. There are people who come here who are trafficked, and there are people who are trafficked domestically. I'm sure it's true in Mexico as well. But what Mexico has that those other two countries don't have is a fairly large irregular migration flow coming from Central America and even from other parts of the world who may transit through, even from African countries or the Middle East. And I'm sort of wondering, the victims of human trafficking in Mexico, do they tend to be Mexican, or are they these migrants who are moving through Mexico en route to another country?
It's both. We've seen Mexicans that have been trafficked, and they tend to come from different states, right? They tend to come from Oaxaca, Chiapas, Guerrero, or some other states within Mexico is what we tended to see. But we also see them like international victims as well, coming from Colombia, Venezuela, uh, as you mentioned, Eastern Europe. We've seen as well. We've seen them from all over the world. We've seen them from within Mexico. So it's very similar to what we experience within the United States.
And I wonder, and this is a bit of a niche question, but is it your sense that the traffickers are taking advantage of people from those countries as they travel to and through Mexico, or are they recruiting through fraud those folks while they're still abroad to come?
Right. The fraudulent recruiting is the main mechanism that we're seeing. It's not so much they're being exploited as they're transiting through, but rather they're being recruited for a specific purpose that ends up not being the case, and then that fraud exists, and then putting them in those precarious positions.
Tammy, could I ask you another question if you're still available? And our panel is
Sure.
wrapping up shortly, um, so I'm sort of wondering about in Canada, how does trafficking victim recruitment take place, right? Are these folks who perhaps are runaways or having some family difficulties at home, or is it all again fraud that they think that they're getting like a some type of job and then they're then held through fraud, force, or coercion? And what does it look like a little bit more in Canada?
It looks very, very similar to the United States. What we have seen quite a bit, like Nova Scotia, which is pretty far out there. That's one of the densest populations for human trafficking, but it's contributed to low socioeconomic issues. There's a lot of child poverty there, a lot of homelessness. So a lot of the young females, um, probably males too, just not reported, are being groomed and being trafficked as a result of that. And then we're seeing it in the urban cities like Toronto or Ottawa. But you're seeing the same types of things, online grooming, where they're going through social media accounts. They're finding people with vulnerabilities. They're using them against them. Also, through the relationship aspect, I'm your boyfriend, I'm your girlfriend, and recruiting them that way. And then, we're seeing a lot of sextortion here in Canada as well, just like in the United States. And what it seems is that sextortion could actually evolve into human trafficking. So I don't really think the landscape is much different than what we're seeing in the United States.
Thank you. So we're just about time um, for our first panel. I know Tom or Tammy, do you have any final thoughts you want to share? I know I've kind of peppered you with questions for the past 15 minutes.
And just for me, I hope that this enhances everybody's cooperation. It's been an honor to be here with you all, and may God bless us. And please help coordinate and make a new friend, find somebody new to cooperate with and share information, and that really enables us to do our job a lot better. So thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to pivot to our second panel. Now, again, I did say this already. Thanks, Tammy and Tom. Thanks for being here today. I thought that was really helpful. hearing the comparative differences and similarities, right, between our different countries. So now we're going to move to the second portion of our program, and that's going to be moderated by the Administrative Director of the University of California, Berkeley Criminal Law and Justice Center, Yanina Gabriela Lapara. So I'll turn it over to her now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you, Tom and Tammy. It was a very complete and an excellent presentation of how you are preparing and the great work that you're already doing. Now we are going to change a little bit more the scope, and we're going to broaden our views a little bit more. First, we have a speaker from Argentina, but he's currently in Sanremo, Italy. He's Claudio De Fabro. He's the Director of International Refugee Law and Migration Law at the International Institute of Humanitarian Law in Sanremo, but the experience is much broader. So please, Claudio, also give us some information more about your background.
Thank you, Janina. Thank you, Antonio, for having me. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here today and to maybe share with you some of the experiences that we have from the Sanremo Institute. We do courses on refugee protection, protection of internally displaced persons, stateless, and also we do training for military personnel and law enforcement agents in regard to human rights and international humanitarian law, which is the law of conflicts. Last year alone, we did more than 60 initiatives targeting more than 2,000 government officials mainly, but also civil society organizations from 129 countries. So we do courses in different countries, also online program, and we do the courses in 6 different languages. So this actually has placed us in a position in which we can gather the trends with regards to trafficking beyond a particular event or a particular country, but just the global trends. So what I wanted to bring to your attention is the link between trafficking, forced displacement, and conflict, which might not necessarily be the main features that maybe Tammy and Thomas were presenting now, but at the global scale, it is the biggest trend. At the moment, we have an estimation of 120 million people who have been forced to flee their home due to conflicts or fear of persecution or serious events disturbing public order. That's 120 million. Of course, there are some regions that are more affected than others, but something that is a trend is that the main cause for forced displacement are actually conflicts and persecution, grave violation of human rights. Now, if you look at this, we have 120 million people. At the same time, we have 130 approximately conflicts, 130 wars now in the planet, and not only Ukraine or Syria, not the ones that appear on the news. Actually, there are 130 wars going on at the moment. Some of them are international, meaning country against country, let's say Russia and Ukraine. Sometimes they are civil wars, let's say the situation in Sudan. But there is an increment of internal conflicts that are at the level of a war. And I think that what we are seeing now in Mexico and also in some parts of Eastern Europe and definitely in Africa and in Asia are also this is the maras, the concept of the cartels, the mafia that actually puts so much pressure and violence on the civilians that actually has led so many people being forcibly displaced. Now, it is in this context that the vulnerability of these individuals increases. Not only because they have been victims of trauma, they have been victims of torture, they don't have access to livelihood, they don't have maybe access to employment, they might not have access to raw materials that they need in order to be able to survive. And on top of that, they have this sense of urgency of fleeing, otherwise they will get killed. So it is in this landscape that they become an easy target for traffickers. So what we have been seeing is that there is a direct correlation between conflicts, forced displacement, and immediately there, the increase of vulnerability that leads to trafficking. The same thing applies also to smuggling. But to trafficking, it actually comes in the form of a way out of the situation. Without, sometimes the victim has a sense that something is wrong, but there is no alternative. And I've seen this when I worked in the camps, in the refugee camps in Syria and in Lebanon. And you see, for example, that there are actually families allowing their girls to get married to rich people, rich men somewhere else in other parts of the world, knowing that something might be wrong, but at the same time is the only way in order for them to be able to survive. Now, there is another element that also comes here into place. It's like when people need to flee to be able to save their life or to be able to access their human rights because of conflict, because of persecution, political opinion, and whatnot, they need to exercise those rights somewhere else, in another country. Now, if the other countries are closing the borders or are applying restrictive mechanisms in order to grieve, that's a sense of protection, then trafficking becomes an avenue to try to get to that protection. So traffickers actually take advantage of the fact that there is a vulnerability in the place of origin, and at the same time, it's very difficult to get to safety. And this actually makes a very direct link that we have to also to take into consideration, because the fact that the states are restricting access to protection to those persons in need actually, but at the same time, law enforcement is becoming better and better, including with access to technology, etc. What actually makes is the routes in order to be able to for the traffickers is becoming more and more dynamic than it was before. It's much more fluid, which actually makes it more complicated to actually address the issue of trafficking. So contrary to what Thomas was seeing, based on what Tim was asking him about where the trafficking starts, actually what we are seeing in many countries, in many regions of the world, that where people move as a result of conflict, is actually that the person becomes a victim of trafficking, becomes recruited on the route. So they flee, and then on the route is when they become vulnerable. Sometimes they become victims of trafficking in order to avoid being put in prison by the country of transit, for example. Yeah. So these are the types. So think about countries, think about that sometimes these routes take place in the desert, the whole Sahel area, the whole southern part of the Sahara. This is just desert where there is absolutely no control, no law enforcement. This is literally no man's land. And also by sea. And this is not just the Mediterranean. You know? So one of the things that we have seen in our courses is the need to work on prevention, identification, and response, not only in the country of destination, but to work very much with civil society, with a small association. It doesn't have to be big NGOs with, fundraising strategy, and sometimes are small, tiny associations of neighbors that can pick up where there is a problem, and then to be able to communicate this and to get the information to the law enforcement agents. And to conclude, I think that something that we have to remember when it comes to law enforcement is that it's something very dynamic. It's something that in many cases is unavoidable, because of the level of vulnerability that it is there, and that there is no one size fits all. There is no Coca-Cola formula to be able to solve the issue of trafficking. Now, one thing is, new laws are not enough. More law enforcement agents is not enough. Knowing the law and the procedures is not enough. Feeling sorry for the victims and survivors is not enough. Even listening and ensuring the participation of the victims in the process for their own solutions, their own protection, is also not enough. But all of these things are needed together. So I think the challenge that we have nowadays, and we've seen this more and more, is the need to have spaces where practitioners, policymakers, law enforcement agents, academics, and also the victims and survivors can come together and can exchange these best practices. Because as I said, there is no one size fits all. But there are some very good ideas here and there that sometimes don't require millions and millions of dollars. Sometimes they don't require to ratify conventions or to change the constitution. Sometimes it's an issue of just trying and listening to what others are doing and picking up on those ideas. And this is, Janina, what we are trying to do precisely in San Remo. Same thing as what Thomas was saying that they are doing now in Mexico. We do that, but at a global level. We bring practitioners and academics, policymakers, etc., pretty much from everywhere in the world. And now we have a new tailored course, online course dedicated specifically to trafficking in the context of refugee movements and migrant movements. I will share with you information after that for this, in case somebody's interested at least to come and to join us in some of the sessions. We strongly believe on the need to learn from each other, and also to learn from the victims themselves. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Claudio. Thank you for sharing this experience. I was going to ask you to provide us the best practice, but I will now move to our next speaker, and we can speak also more after the presentation and also later. Our next speaker is also going to let us know more about other initiatives that are taking place, particularly in Tanzania, in Africa, in other regions. So we're going to have Godfrey Mpandikisi, right? Yes. He is the Executive Director of Tanzania Anti-Trafficking and Legal Initiative. And we're going to be very curious to tell us your experience at the international level and to hear about the trends that you're seeing.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, for this opportunity. As you have said, my name is Godfrey Mpandikisi. I'm the Executive Director of the Tanzania Anti-Human Trafficking and Legal Initiative, but I'm also the legal advisor of the African Survivors Coalition. This is at the continental level. But as you have said, that I'm sharing a bit experience of what we are doing in Africa, or what we are doing particularly in Tanzania. In Africa and Tanzania, we are also actually combating human trafficking. As you know that this kind of scourge, it needs a global response, which you also need also to work together and to collaborate with other partners. Like in Tanzania and Africa, we are doing the following areas. Number one, we are working on prevention programs, whereby we have outreach programs in the communities, engagement, for example. We are working also on issues of radio and TV programs to address the scourge of human trafficking. But also in Africa, in many parts of Africa, like Tanzania and Kenya, we are using also local chiefs and the church leaders are also play a very significant role to address the scourge of human trafficking. And also local government leaders, whereby we find that as according to the structures of the local government in Africa, there are local government at the 10 cell leaders, for example, they also play a very significant role to address human trafficking. But also in addressing human trafficking, we're also working on issue of protection to victims and survivors of human trafficking, whereby here at our organization, for example, we have a dropping in center, whereby we are making arrangement for the repatriation of the victims and survivors of human trafficking. We are providing shelter, for example, psychosocial counseling. They need also some medical treatment. These are issues which are coming now and then from frequently when we are working on the scourge of human trafficking, especially to victims and survivors in Tanzania. But also like a family reunion, we are also making tracing up where their families in and where are they. So it is a bit sometimes difficult to trace some of the information because you find that the victim or the survivor do not have the information or the contact address of his relative and so on. That's also another challenge that we are facing here in Tanzania in countering human trafficking. But also we are facing other issues like when we are working in prosecution, for example. There is a very little understanding of how this human trafficking crime looks like from the legal practitioner themselves, like the prosecutors, the judges, and the investigators. They still do not understand the crime of human trafficking because human trafficking in Africa in many parts is seen as an invisible phenomenon to the extent that this kind of crime does not exist, which is of course not true. And therefore this will bring a lot of challenges, even to the judges, to the magistrate, do not understand how this crime looks like. So we have been also getting a lot of difficulties on how victims can get compensation for them, on how a victim can get redress if the magistrate do not understand this kind of crime, how it looks like, if a judge cannot understand how this crime looks like. Therefore, it is difficult now. I'm a legal practitioner here in Africa and to the African court litigating this kind of human trafficking. You find that most of the human trafficking cases are lost because the judge don't understand it. That's how this crime looks like. And therefore, it is very difficult in litigating even human trafficking cases here in Africa and Tanzania in particular. So this has been a very serious challenge. And like even during the reporting to the police station here in Africa, police find that they do not understand how this crime looks like and how to use the trauma-informed approach, our victim-centered approach in underscoring and analyzing this kind of crime is also an issue in Africa because they don't know how this crime looks like. To us, this brings a lot of confusion and the problem when we want to address the issue of the human trafficking within the criminal justice system. Is always a very difficult job and tedious. But also that we are working here in Tanzania is the area of collaboration. Because of the compounding nature of the crime itself, we needed to build a collaboration with the other actors. Like in how Tanzania has been centered, the geography, find that from South Sudan or from Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, and Uganda are passing here in Tanzania, going to South Africa, countries who are victims and so on. So if we don't build up the collaboration between Somalia, we don't build the collaboration between Ethiopia and Sudan, you find this brings a lot of difficulties on how to address the scourge of human trafficking in Tanzania. And another issue that which we are also facing, we are doing here in Tanzania and at our organization here, we are providing legal aid and access to justice to these victims and the survivors of human trafficking. As I've said, I'm a lawyer, and one of them, my core duty here at the office is also to provide legal aid and the access to justice. But now, what is on the ground now? What we are facing now? You find that these services we are providing free of charge. We have no government funding to support this kind of activities which we are doing. That also brings a lot of difficulties. And for us who are working in Africa in countering this scourge, you find that we don't have access to our fellows, for example, in San Francisco, our fellows who can support us in Tanzania and Africa. Where do they see us? That also brings a lot of difficulty. I've been listening from my fellow speakers, and I thank Antonia for also bringing me to this table of discussion. It has been a very luck that I'm appearing in this kind of platform because people, they don't understand us. Where are we? Where are we located? What are we doing? I think these are some of the challenges that we are getting in countering human trafficking in Africa and Tanzania in particular. because in most of the all time, it is a one man show alone. We don't have access to our fellows, for example, in the US, for example, we can collaborate and we can work together. And you find that there is no any funding for the global south, for example. We don't receive any grants that this we can support. And we have written a lot of reports. Maybe after the program, I will share with you here in the platform, see what we are doing. But this brings a lot of difficulties. For example, now a survivor or victims is hungry. For the whole day, he didn't even get a meal, and he needs support from us. Where do we get the funding to support this kind of survivor? He need a transport fare from the city center going to the rural area, because as you know, also the main cause of trafficking in Africa is the issue of poverty. For example, most of the families here in Africa and in Tanzania are in severe poverty, and therefore now, because of that scourge, now they want to turn back to their original families. How do we send them if we don't have the funding to support? That has also been the difficulties. Another issue is, as we know here in Africa and Tanzania, we have the issue of unemployment for the youth. Most of the youth are unemployed, and therefore the government does not provide employment. And most of these victims who are going outside Tanzania are going to the Gulf countries, for example, where is their main point of destination now, and for sexual exploitation. This is the major part, that how girls from Africa and Tanzania in particular are going to the Gulf countries because of the sexual exploitation. And also we are facing other kind of exploitation from rural to urban. You know, like we're in the city center of Dar es Salaam. You find that others are coming from the rural villages and so on, want to come here to Dar es Salaam because of the false information and so on, are trapped into this kind of the scourge of human trafficking. And now they need kind of help. What can we do? I think that also poses a very serious challenge in Africa on how we address the scourge of human trafficking. And therefore now I think there is a need to build up the collaboration. There is a need to see how we can work together between the US and Africa, and we are doing in the actors here to see how we can collaborate. Because also I've been also appealing to the UNODC in the constructive dialogue. We've been discussing these kind of issues now and then, but we find that there is a very little support for other actors who are working on the African ground in addressing the scourge of human trafficking. Now, because of this kind of the scourge, it is important, and one of the holistic approach, that we need also to build up partnership and collaboration with the other actors in order to address this kind of scourge of human trafficking. It is not a one-man show that can counter the scourge of human trafficking, which is of course difficult. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Godfrey. We got a good understanding now of what are the needs in Tanzania. What I wanted to ask you particularly was from your experience and the importance that local organizations have. Claudio talked about it. You are talking about it. How do you think that the international community can improve or support more the local organizations, if you have seen that there are programs that could actually expand and also support your organization or organizations like yours?
Yeah, thank you very much, Moderator. We have seen the international collaboration, like we have been working with the UNODC, for example, in Vienna. They have been also providing like this kind of capacity building training, this kind of peer-to-peer programs that you have. We can make the peer review, for example, to the conventions, the UNTOC and the Palermo conventions, how to understand it and how does it provide. I think that has been coming now and then. But the main challenge that we've been facing, that the strictness of the funding itself is very difficult. You know, in Tanzania, local government, local energy organization like ours, taking the requirement which they provide so that we can access funding is very difficult. They provide a lot of conditions, a lot of requirement that we need to fulfill in order to access fund. That brings a lot of difficulty. And very few or none can apply and get the funding from like the UNODC, like the victim funding, which has been announcing now and then. It's very difficult because most of us who are working in Africa, we are still working at the local level. The technological aspect that using the application so on is a bit a challenge, and we don't have the prerequisite documents that they need this kind of document to pack together and submit. That also brings a lot of difficulties in making application. And therefore, this also brings a lot of difficulty in how to counter human trafficking from the ground. Like we need to go to work to the market to raise awareness. We need to go to the community engagement at the community gathering point to make awareness raising. How can we travel like 900 kilometers to reach there if we don't have the access fund or support that can assist us to go there and make awareness raising to the communities on the ground at the local level?
Thanks. I see Claudio also nodding, so you probably also have your best practices and experience to share on this topic.
I cannot agree more with what Godfrey was saying. I mean, the support of the international community is needed, definitely. But the way that support trickles down at the local level is almost non-existent sometimes. And we're not talking about the need for millions and millions. But it is true that for the big donors, especially the big donor countries and the big UN agencies, it is easier, it's more suitable for their own accounting and their own accountability systems to give the funding to big international organizations, to big international NGOs that can have proper finance system, that can have proper log frame, very fancy project proposals, etc. And then from there, it somehow cascades down to the field. Let me just give you some concrete examples. At the moment, according to UNODC and ILO, there are 49, that's 49 million people in the world that are affected by modern slavery. 22 million are girls that have been forcibly married, early marriage. Now, how this works? The moment the girl has her first period, is candidate for early marriage. In many cultures, it's like that. The moment a boy can hold an AK-47 like this, that means that it's strong enough to shoot, meaning that it's at risk of being forcibly recruited. Now, this doesn't happen downtown in the big capitals. This actually happens in shanty towns, or it happens in rural areas where there is nobody there. Now, how this can be done? How can we prevent that? Sometimes, again, as I was saying, you don't need millions, but what you do need, for example, is a school that works. So like this, girls and boys can go to school. The moment they are in the school, it's not just about education. It's also about being it's a form of prevention for sexual exploitation or forced recruitment. I've been involved when I worked in Panama and in Colombia. Some of the most successful projects that we had involved, for example, sporting activities, involved a way in which they play, the kids play, and then they will be talking. There will be sessions in which what we talk, and we could identify that there were some signals of there was somebody in the area that was trying to recruit. Or giving training to doctors, giving training to teachers, giving training not about the convention and about articles, but which are the signs that they should pick up, and more importantly, to whom they should refer such a case in a way that is anonymity is guaranteed, so they are also protected. So the way in terms of best practices can go from something big, like big forums, or something for people who are already convinced that human trafficking is a bad thing, like here. Here, we're all convinced that it's a bad thing. But trust me, when you go out there, some people are not, it's exactly what Godfrey was saying. Some people are not convinced that is a bad thing. Some people will say that it's a cultural thing. Some people will say, well, they were in love. Or some people will say, well, it's another source of income. Or they will say, well, this is part of our culture. So in some parts, the best practice is more than just putting things on a website and just exchanging those best practices among each other. Sometimes it's just going to the very, very basics. Again, the number is very scary. 49 million people working in slavery, 26 million people trafficked at any time, at any point in time. Numbers are huge.
It is unfortunately, it is a very impressive number, and still, as you were mentioning, not everybody is aware about this crime. Godfrey, you were mentioning that the judges particularly were not aware, were not recognizing the trafficking as an issue. Claudio or Godfrey, could you actually speak of a best practice to train or to raise awareness among the judiciary as well? Something that work that you could advise?
Yeah, thank you very much. And that has been a very good issue. We have been working on it from last year, middle of the September, whereby we met with their judges because of the number of the cases which were delivered were not almost tackling the trafficking looks like. So the conversation and discussion with the judges, and they admitted that we don't know how human trafficking looks like. So what we did now, we said, okay, you have to make your self-assessment. The judges, they conducted their own self-assessment and like a survey on their needs assessment, what kind of training they need, what kind of they demand. And therefore now they come up with a report and the concept note, which provides a number of areas which they need capacity building and training on how to make the judgment, for example, to investigation, to analyze the case and understand the conviction until the judgment is out. So they bring to us that document, and maybe if you like, I will share with you the concept note and their needs. They need the capacity building. And now what we are doing now at our office now, we are looking two things or three things. Number one, for an agent organization who can fund that kind of training for the judges. There are about 100 judges who need also the capacity building or training. And they have been clustered according to the zone, like of the zone A, zone B, like the Tanzania countries have been structured according to the zone, how the court has been structured. That is number one, that we are looking for someone who can fund that kind of training. But number two, judges are better well trained to be by their fellow judges. So we have been also looking, where can you get the competent judges, maybe from US or from San Francisco, who can come and train judges here in Tanzania, and they can understand how human trafficking crime looks like, and how the judgment looks like in entertaining human trafficking cases. So that is also an issue that we are also still looking at, where we can get competent judges who can come and train their fellow judges in Tanzania. Because I think that for me, like I'm a legal practitioner, litigating human trafficking cases, and then I'm going to train judges, I think that will be very much, not very much good. So that judges need to be trained by their fellow judges. I think they'll be more comfortable than me. So that also we have been looking where we can get experts, especially like from US or from UK, who can come and train these judges in Tanzania. So that is a typical challenge that we have. And maybe after the program, I can share what the documents look like, their concept note, and what they are looking for. I have in my desk, and I'll be able to share. So that challenge which we are facing in Africa, and that is the example for Tanzania.
If I may, Janina, in this regard, something that, and I'm making reference to the comment of Julie in the chat. One of the key elements for preventing, identifying, and giving protection to victims and survivors is actually to have a very robust case management system in which everyone knows what is their particular role. From the judge, as Godfrey was saying, being trained of what the law says and how it should be applied, the whole way down to the neighbor who identifies that something is fishy in that house, something is not well there. But then to make sure that the police officer or the border official know that that person is not the one in charge of giving medical assistance to, for example, the survivor, or to say, well, you need to go to a psychiatrist, or I'm going to put you in a detention facility until we figure out what is going on. It is very important to have a proper case management system at all the different stages. And this actually gives, and this is also an experience that I had in some countries I worked in, including Afghanistan. Setting up a good case management system is a very good excuse, if you allow me, to bring together all the different actors that are involved in addressing the issue of human trafficking. And at the same time, to bring them all to the table, to coordinate and to identify where are the blind spots, or where are the parts where we say, like, wait a minute, but nobody is given money to this person to be able to go back home, for example, in terms of transport, as Godfrey was saying. Or wait a minute, nobody is thinking about how this woman will be able to reinitiate life upon return when there is such a big stigma that, in fact, this woman there is not seen as a victim of trafficking, is seen as she was a prostitute. So everything has to come together. And setting up such a system, I think it worked very well in some places, because you will realize that you have to, for example, when you talk about access to justice, it's not just about the judge, is to talk about pro bono lawyers, but also talk about legal aid clinics, for example, with the law faculty, to talk about NGOs that provide legal assistance, how they can come together, how they can divide the cases. Are they going to divide them by area? Are they going to divide it by type of case? Do some of the legal aid providers need specific training on how to do interviewing techniques with victims of trauma, for example? So these are all the things that can come together. Otherwise, and I've seen this in, I was telling this to Antonia yesterday when we had the pre-meeting. My mother always complained that they send me to places without postcards, right? And this is because I spent all my professional career in conflict areas. But one of the main features of working in situations like this is the horrible situation, people killing each other, injustice. That is one side. But at the other side is a lot of people wanting to help, but all at the same time. And that doesn't work, because it can actually, one of the principles of humanitarian response, one of the most important principles of humanitarian response is do no harm. And if we don't have a very coordinated way in addressing a problem, we actually may end up doing more harm. So this might be something to put some thinking, especially in terms of what, Antonia, you're leading this group of very committed organizations. This would be my 2 cents from my experience. That, of course, is not exactly what's going on in your area. I don't pretend to say that I know what it is going on there. But from my experience from other parts of the world, that could be best practice. And if that was possible in Afghanistan, trust me, I'm sure it will be possible in some of your areas as well.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Nina and Godfrey, and Tim, and Thomas, and Tammy. This was so enlightening, and you covered so many aspects of our work. And Claudio, you brought a lot of thoughts about the future and where exactly we need to really put more effort. And thank God I'm not the only leading this group, this coalition. Many of my colleagues here are on leadership positions, and they will help us to bring your ideas and Godfrey's ideas to a higher level. Now it's time to focus on questions, to give our patient listeners and engaged listeners to some time to get answers to their questions. I want to bring back Thomas and Tim with the question of Yanina. With the development of new technologies, will you use any emerging technology during the World Cup that is meant to improve the prevention of human trafficking among other serious crime?
So for the United States, yes, it's you think about emerging technology, you think science fiction or artificial intelligence. But for the Super Bowl, we tried just a new real-time information sharing platform. So basically, we created a human trafficking command center. And so with these big events, there's a lot of security, right? So there are security command centers. There's one at the stadium. There's usually one run by local police. But there also was one specifically for human trafficking. And it helped support some pre-planned operations, right? Where we might have like a hotel room op aimed on survivor recovery. But it also allowed any type of emergency call that came in could get a trained HT law enforcement officer to respond to it, right? So those calls were siphoned over to the command center because as much as we train, there is a difference between someone getting an hour training, which is good on human trafficking to identify the indicators, but having someone who actually works it as a crime, who understands how to interact with the survivors and how to gather the information needed to make a prosecution, that's a whole different thing, right? So we staffed it with people, and so did all the state and local law enforcement agencies staffed it with people and with intel people, so they could really quickly put together the dots. They had this real-time platform for pushing that real-time intelligence out very rapidly to everybody, and it really helped to make information sharing easier. San Francisco the Bay Area is a area of towns, really, right? San Francisco is a big city, but there's a lot of individual state and local law enforcement agencies. So getting information across them even with the best intentions, can be quite slow. So I would say an organizational technology, if you want to call it that, is that command center just focused on HT. Another thing is this platform for very rapidly allowing the intel folks to work up the information very quickly and having people respond across jurisdictions. So that worked really well. That was actually the Center for Combating Human Trafficking actually called and asked to learn more about the technology for application in the World Cup. So certainly it's going to happen in San Francisco, but it may actually happen in other cities in the United States.
Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you, Claudio and Godfrey, for staying late at night, given your locations. And let's hope for great collaboration going forward. Thank you, Nina, and thank you, Tim, for being great moderators and speakers at the same time. Wishing you a great day and good night to Claudio and Godfrey. And thank you to all our members that attended today. We'll continue. Don't forget to come to the Teen Summit this coming Saturday. It will be a great event. Thank you all very much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
Bye.
you.